Well, to switch topic, you are known as a monarchist and as a defender of monarchists, and maybe one of the most, famous ones. And what exactly is monarchism? How would you describe it or define it? And why would somebody be a monarchist? Like, what do you think are the advantages of that? For the common man who's maybe not the monarch himself, or the aristocrats who rule the country.
Well, it all depends on on what you want to be ruled by. Do you want to be would you rather be ruled by someone who's trained from birth, uh, A, in the position, and B, in the notion that if he rules you badly, he'll fry forever in hell? Or would you rather be ruled by someone for whom you're a cow, to be milked to squeak? It's really that simple.
I think I'll take the first one in that case.
They, oh, really? I don't understand. I much prefer the second because it's what we have. And remember, if you want anything better than what we've got, you're a LARPer.
Right.
What you need to do is embrace what you have. The leadership we've got is the brightest and the best. And they showed us during COVID. As I like to say, when they had us put on our masks, they took theirs off. No, but seriously, as to what monarchism is, well, monarchy has almost as many meanings as republic does, or democracy. People talk about democracy all the time, and they don't define it. You have in Europe today, all over the continent, from Britain to Germany and Austria, you've got people saying about how sometimes people, usually in government now, how you have to sometimes violate democratic values in order to preserve democracy. I see. I get it. That's like you said during Vietnam. Sometimes you have to destroy a village in order to save it. I get it. I understand. What they mean by democracy is that they're in charge and you're not. I mean that in a nice way. I mean everything, but the truth is that democracy, as we've been taught, doesn't really exist outside of very few places. Some of the Swiss cantons, the New England town meetings, things like that. There you have real democracy. But in terms of a major country, or a minor country for that matter, no. When I was a teenager back in the 70s, there was a running joke, which was in the United States and Western Europe, we have representative democracy. In the Soviet bloc, they had people's democracy. And Idi Amin of Uganda, the dictator there, defined cannibalism as nutritional democracy. And I think the latter is what the current leadership really hold. If you look at cannibalism as a metaphor,
Right.
and not, if you're not a literalist like Idi Amin was, but if you take it as a metaphor for modern governance, nutritional democracy is what it's about.
You mean sucking
No,
dry the resources of all the people to benefit themselves, the politicians?
of course, of course. I mean, stop and think about it. Where, if democracy is the rule by the majority, do the majority of farmers in Great Britain and the Netherlands and Germany want to be thrown out of their property? Is that real? Is that what most people want? Is that a majority? I'm not entirely sure. Do most people want to be euthanized? I don't think so. I know that 50 years ago, the vast majority of people thought that abortion was murder. And that over the passage of 50 years, they had their views changed for them. Was that democracy? If you, if what we were told democracy is, governments and their associated drones, hangers on, and parasites ought not to be in the business of changing the people, but of delivering the people what they want. But no one can deny that over the past 50 years, the people have been changed and are continuing to be changed by their masters. I asked an old Central European once, if he was a Republican, was living in the States, if he was a Republican or a Democrat. He said, well, I can't very well be a Republican because I'm a monarchist. And I can't be a Democrat because I do not believe in democracy. And I asked him, are you against democracy? He said, certainly not. But I'm not against the tooth fairy either. And I'm afraid that the false dichotomy of monarchy versus democracy is pitting something that is certainly real, whether you like it or not, versus the tooth fairy. That is a lesson that first and foremost has to be understood. There will always be the rulers, there will always be the ruled. The rulers will always be a minority. The ruled will always be a majority. That has been true in every human society that has ever existed from the beginning of mankind, and it will be until God closes the thing down. Now, that being the case, that being the reality of the situation, there's a second reality, and that is that every society has a sort of state church, an animating philosophy that decrees right and wrong, that gives legitimacy and authority to the rulership. It's always been that way and always will be. It doesn't have to be religious. Under the Soviets, communism was the state church. There is no God, and Lenin is his prophet. With us, it's this sort of gooey, mealy-mouthed, weenie-ish liberalism that's, oh, I don't know, it's just so awful. Everybody's got to be nice, and I'll beat you to a pulp if you aren't. That, whatever that is, that's our state church today. There may be separation of my church and the state, but the state will always have some church of some kind. Because that, again, it's just the way human beings are. It's the way our civilizations are. It's the way our cultures are. So what makes one culture different from another is A, the nature of that animating principle, that state church, and B, as a result, the nature of the ruling class, of the rulership. Now, I'm actually, believe it or not, answering your question. What do I mean when I say that I'm a monarchist? Well, I'm obviously not a big fan of either the Ottoman sultans or the Qing emperors in China, although it hasn't escaped me that they were both better than what succeeded them. But my ideal is Catholic Christian monarchy, which, if you boil it down to 5 points, looking at the different nations of Europe and elsewhere and what they and their proponents held in common, there were basically 5 points in Catholic monarchy and Christian monarchy. The altar, which was the church as the animating spirit of society, the determining principle, the giver of legitimacy, and so on. The throne, which was a monarch with authority, but sufficient power to direct the state, as it were, foreign policy, the military, and all that. And internally, as Franz Josef put it very well, protect his people from their politicians. Because, of course, there's no one to do that in our current system. We're simply a buffet table for the political folk. But that is the nature of the throne, of course, hedged about by tradition and all that. The third point was local liberties, provincial rights, or what we today would call subsidiarity, which is just as important as the other two. The fourth, we would call today solidarity. And by that, we mean the notion of the different classes and elements of society as not as enemies, as contending against one another, but as distinct and different parts of a greater whole, working together as part of a family for the greater good. During the interwar period, they came up with all sorts of isms, names, to try to describe that kind of a state. Solidarism, distributism, corporatism, on and on and on. But they were all describing different aspects of the same basic idea. And lastly, but not leastly, the notion of Christendom, of Abendland, the Reichsidee, the idea that all Christian nations are somehow united in a loose but real way. Those are the five elements of traditional monarchy, so far as I can discern them. And that is what I believe as a monarchist. Now, how you would apply that specifically to this or that country, that's a whole other issue. But before you can even think about applying anything to anything, you've got to have your basic ideas. You've got to have your first principles. Then you can get down to figuring out how you apply them. What we do today is that we ignore the whole idea of first principles and just try to apply things in a very pragmatic manner. And it has only one major problem with that. It doesn't work. Small problem, I grant you, tiny, little. But no, I have to admit, the nadir of my experience in my 62 years, now 64, with democracy was the COVID lockdown. I mean, this really ripped the face of the mask away from the real nature of power. Our masters run the show, and we'll do as they tell us, or we'll pay the price. One has to come to that understanding first. So when you understand that, and then you look at things like the stoplight coalition in Germany, you look at the president of Austria refusing to talk to the head of the FPÖ despite they're having the highest number of votes. You look at the cordon sanitaire that all the French parties put around Mademoiselle Le Pen. You see the same thing. We're all for the rules and we maintain them unless they're not in our favor, in which case we break them. Now, there's a real problem with that. And the problem with it is that it will radicalize the so-called far right. If you pretend that you believe in a certain set of rules and you consistently break them, God help you if your opponents ever come to power, because they won't forget what you did. And that's something that's a little too hard for our current political people to understand. Being most of them, my brother generation of 68 people, it's a combination of immaturity and senility, which you don't really see too often in other generations. But I like to say we're the only generation that grew old without ever growing up.